Welcome to Season 5, Episode 10 of Baseball Pitching the Fix, the podcast keeping pitchers safe and reaching their peak performance. I am your host, Joe Janish, and with me, as always, is baseball pitching motion expert Angel Borrelli. And in today's episode, we have a fun-filled, feature-packed episode. We're going to start lessons from MLB. We're going to talk about how Major League Baseball is trying to keep their pitchers healthy and some of the flaws with some of the ideas that they have out there. In the teaching moment, we are going to talk about the late arm and why it is so dangerous. And the ninth inning, as always, it is a surprise. So that's when Angel comes in from the bullpen. And before we get started, I have a big announcement. Angel has launched a YouTube channel. And Angel, I think that here's where you should talk a little bit about your new YouTube channel.
Yes, well, I'm so excited about it, and it's actually because of the requests that the audience, that you guys have had about the show and wishing to see things that are visual so that you actually can know more about what I'm talking about. I think the hardest thing for me over the years has been to, because I can't use a formal language that we use in science, to try to describe to you things about the body, the positions, etc., and not be able to really know that I've taught you thoroughly or that all of you have heard and seen the exact same thing. So I decided to launch a YouTube channel where you can not only go to and listen to the podcast there, and as you're listening, and we will be today launching it because we will have visuals for what we're talking about. You'll be able to go there and find the material. And so you'll be able to hear me describing what you're seeing in the whether it's a video or a still shot. Today we happen to be using still shots, but the station is still under construction. But it is going to be starting today. This podcast will be available on it, as well as all this season's podcasts. And what you're going to start to see there are educational things that I'm going to be offering, and because I love to teach so much. And so I hope, at your request, yes, we're finally finding a way to have this visual component. So I'm really excited about it. And be patient. It'll probably be completely looking the way we want it to look in maybe 2 weeks. But I still want you to be able to go today and see what it is that we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Angel. We've been doing this for 5 years now, and, a lot of the issues and subjects that we talk about are kind of difficult to understand in just describing, through audio. So I think this is going to be a huge, huge benefit to all of our listeners, because now they'll be able to more easily see some of the things that you're talking about. I think it's going to provide a lot of clarity and make things a lot easier for people to understand. We're going to have the link in the show notes to the YouTube channel. If by chance you can't find them in the notes, just go to YouTube and look up Angel Borrelli Pitching, and it should pop up. So that's a big, exciting news for us this week. And we really hope that you enjoy the new YouTube channel. So let's get kicked off. So lessons from MLB. Angel, there was something that I saw earlier this year, and it started to get to be a big thing. And it's just another one of those strange developments in baseball, and one of those reactions to keeping pitchers healthy and preventing their injuries. The Tampa Bay Rays started this thing called the opener. And it's where you take one of your top relievers and you start them as the starter in the first inning. And the whole idea is that, I could see where this could be a pretty cool idea. You get to use one of your best pitchers every single day, but the idea behind it is really that the relief pitcher, in most cases with Tampa Bay, it's Sergio Romo. He comes in and he faces the top three hitters of the lineup, presumably, and then in the next inning, the starter will take over. And there's a couple of things behind this. They have some young pitchers that they're trying to protect. And in their minds, protection means limiting innings, limiting pitches, and it's also limiting exposure. So one of these things that they do is they bring the pitcher in the second inning, or maybe even the third, and he faces fewer batters. And the idea being they only want to expose him to the lineup twice, because the stats say that after you go through the lineup twice, the hitters get to know you and they have higher batting average and whatever against you. So they want to protect these young pitchers in that way as well. So it's not just a matter of saving their arm. They also want to kind of save them from facing the top top batter. So once they go through the lineup for them a second time, they're actually facing the lower part of the lineup, which is usually not the best hitters on the other team. And they don't have to face, say, the top three, because the way it goes throughout the innings, that's how it works out. But in any case, this is just another thing that Major League Baseball has implemented. It, and like one of the other things I remember them doing in the minor league systems, most minor league teams do this thing called the piggyback system, where you have 4 starters who pitch 2 innings each. And then that's how they pitch, instead of pitching like full games or even pitching, 5 or 6 innings. They just pitch 2 innings, and then the next starter comes in for the next 2 innings, and the next starter comes in for the next 2 innings. And they'll do this over the course of every game. You won't have a starter going all 9 innings or even 7 or even 5. They just go 2. And it's just another thing where they're like worried about protecting the pitcher's arm and trying to save the bullets, for lack of a better term. And these are just 2 examples of a lot of the different things that we're seeing out there. And I wanted to get your perspective on these different interesting alternative techniques that baseball is trying to implement to kind of save the pitcher's arms. But in the end, are they really saving anything? And are there better things that they can do? Or is there something that they're missing in all this pitch limitation and innings limitation and everything else? I figure we should talk to you about this.
Well, right now this feels real personal to me in the sense that I don't get a chance to watch a lot of games because of my schedule, but I was watching a Yankees game over the weekend, and I hadn't watched one for a while, and Severino was pitching. And during the game, every time a hitter hit the ball, and it was a double, triple, whatever, there were about 5 statistics they gave about the hit. We had this trajectory and this exit rate and blah, blah, blah. And then,
right.
and I said, wow. And they're using all these terms that are actually kind of scientific terms. And, as someone who works in the field of science, you don't hear me use those terms a lot because, I'm not a person who needs to use those terms. Sometimes it was to such a degree, it almost sounded out of place. It almost sounded weird. And then they started talking about Severino, who, by the way, was kicking butts, throwing 100 miles an hour. And they're talking about how he should be worried because his slider is moving X number of degrees less to the right or to the left or whatever it was doing, and up and down. And they were critiquing him, and they brought up this same comment at least 4 times during just the few innings I watched. And I was thinking to myself, what is happening here? And what is frustrating to me about this is that there's a lot of science, quote unquote science, it seems to be being brought into the game under the guise of we're concerned about our pitchers' arms. And then, of course, the statistics about performance for hitting. Well, that's a whole nother topic and not my forte. But let's just talk about this with pitchers and with the example that you're giving. And then also some of the other things that have come up. What bothers me about this, and a metaphor comes to my mind, not seeing the forest for the trees. What bothers me is that there's all these myriads of solutions that teams seem to be coming up with. And the reason why I know this, by the way, and for you listeners who haven't been following, if you haven't heard our interviews with Coach Larry Owens from Bellarmine, you need to go back and hear those 2 shows. He's an amazing guy, and of course was a White Sox coach and is at Bellarmine now. And I call him for all the baseball information because I don't understand a lot of the things like the rules about the roster and this and that. And so I'll call him up, and he is educating me on a number of practices that are going on. And he forwarded a great article to me. And in this article, there were 5 things, Joe, just the thing you mentioned was one of them. He was also in this article, it was that the average number of innings starters are going right now are 5.
Yeah.
They also mentioned what you brought up in the minor leagues, that they can't go over 75 pitches. That all of a sudden it's like they shouldn't pitch too much. And then this thing about the Rays, and I love when you said it does sound kind of exciting to have your closer in to start the game. In other words, if it's an offensive move.
Right.
but none of the moves that they're making sound offensive to me. If they sound defensive, like, oh, our pitcher, once you see him twice, you're going to see everything he's got. What? I'm watching some of the great, I watched a lot of college baseball last year. There's pitchers that know how to dance around that plate, and seeing the hitter more than once can be an advantage sometimes. I think that when you have mislabeled or not gotten to the core of what a problem is, you're going to come up with solutions that do not solve the problem. Years ago, when injuries started, they wanted to do something. And I love Major League for doing this. They wanted to do something. And of course, they brought in the Moneyball thing. Let's bring in science. Let's bring in numbers. Let's bring in statistics. Because that, of course, is always the easiest thing to look at, evaluate, and understand. It's not easy to look at a pitcher and look at his arm and have someone say, gee, his arm's like not in the right position at this moment. And so that's going to cause this tension around this joint. That's a whole different ball game. And because it tends to be abstract to those that don't know it, no one goes in that direction. So 5, 6 years ago, everybody's jumping around. Let's solve this problem. I love that everyone wants to solve it. But because nobody has really looked at the exact reason for a lot of the issues that came up years ago, they're starting to address the problem with solutions that are not fitting to what the problem really is. When a pitcher is not pitching correctly, or if a pitcher does not get enough recovery, he is going to get injured. Not one of these solutions here talks about recovery, because even when they talk about pitch count control, they're not talking about, okay, we're going to control his pitch count so he doesn't pitch too much, because they still don't give him enough recovery. I have never been a fan of controlling a pitcher's pitch count. It's insane to me that you're taking a pitcher into the pros and letting him only go 75 pitches. That's equivalent. Every pitcher throws 25 pitches in a bullpen at least, unless you're a closer. So what? Now we've only got like 50 pitches in a game. Like, he would never do that in high school. He would go 25 and then possibly go 100. Pitchers need to go deeper because they are a skilled precision athlete, and they have got to feel, how do I feel when I'm in up to 60 pitch count? When does my slider start working? What do I need to do to make this happen sooner? And starters work on a big picture. Now, the reason why I can speak about this is because I work hip to hip with all my pitchers and have done this for more than 25 years. You learn a lot about the psyche of a pitcher, and you learn a lot about what it takes to be a pitcher. To limit that, or to take from them the ability to start the game. Every starter, when I ask a pitcher, are you a starter or a closer? And he says a starter, and I say, why do you like it? They always say the same thing. I love starting and controlling the game. A starter's not used to going in the second or third inning. And I would love someone to research to see if the closers do as well when they're only in the first inning, because for closers, they're wired differently. The pressure's not there. So it would be very interesting to see, although they're probably one of the most adaptive of all pitchers, so there may be no results with this. But a closer is usually a fan of, he loves that tension. So now you've got him in a weird position too. But because we're afraid that our pitcher's going to have too many innings, or we're afraid of him pitching, we're afraid of him having a high pitch count. All these fears have created these plans, these practices that to me are not addressing the problem. Give a pitcher adequate rest from whatever he does, and then let him bring a recovered arm to the mound. The only arm you want on the mound is a recovered arm. And recovery has not been in anything, any practices that anybody has done since this whole Tommy John problem started 5, 6, 7 years ago. When it started reaching such numbers, every practice has not been about recovery, and no one sees the value of it. And yet, when the ASMI puts out the reports, it is the number one reason why they know that pitchers get injured is because they're pitching with a fatigued arm. So while all of these practices, they may be good, and in a room full of baseball coaches, them knowing more than I do about some of the intricacies, they might say these things have value. But here's what I don't like. Don't come up with 8 or 9 solutions when you have not tried the basic one, which is let the pitcher do what he's always done, which is to pitch. Let him learn how to be good at his skill. And then, regardless of how many pitches he throws, follow the guidelines, which we know work to give them recovery. The major leagues, and I've said this before on the show, I had a pro pitcher and he would start on Sunday, he'd be off on Monday, he told me, a hard side on Tuesday, a soft side on Wednesday. And then he said, oh, and then I would absolutely always need the day before off, and then I would start. He says, what can I do with that? And I said, first of all, you're throwing a bullpen on Tuesday when you've thrown 100 pitches on Sunday? And he said, that's the way we have to do it. I said, well, then at least change the soft side till Tuesday and go hard on Wednesday. At least he's not, he's giving his arm something. But it's the most ridiculous practice. And then even in discussion with some coaches, they said, well, as the season goes on and near the end of the season with the October, or if you're in the playoffs, sometimes they don't make the pitchers, do those sides. Well, guess what? This should be something you should be thinking about earlier on. And I am working on some ideas for how major leagues can do some things a little bit differently, especially now that I have so many guys in the major leagues. But that's not the point of this. The point of this is that I think whenever you take an athlete and you start tying his hands and you start acting like more defensive, he's the most offensive player on the team. And when you take that away, and you have hesitation, and then you're using arbitrary numbers, I think we're going to see a whole different kind of thing happen to the pitchers. And I think that even though while some of these practices may be looking like they're having some results, they're kind of chipping away at a foundation in a sport that in my opinion, until I see that you've tried the basics of give him rest from the appropriate rest for the number of pitches he threw. Until you tell me you tried that and it doesn't work, then I'm not going to be happy with any of this other stuff that goes in and alters the fabric of the way you usually run the game. To not let starters go 7 innings. That's really going to the fabric of how you run your team. Now, I feel strongly about this, and even though, of course, I'm not a coach, you have to remember, I've been for 25 years working with pitchers on a daily basis. It's all I do. So I have longitudinal evidence that when you follow pitch counts, which is what my pitchers do, they recover, they bring a recovered arm to the mound, they don't get injured, and they improve their performance. And what I have that's even better proof is I did have some pitchers that swayed away from those practices. They were under my wing, they went off, and then here and there, they either stopped warming up or they didn't follow recovery. And those pitchers were injured, some of them having surgeries. And of course, because I keep track of everyone, I can say that when you follow all the rules, the arm seems to love it. And until I see that done, I'm not going to like any of these ideas because it's giving an artificial feeling that they're solving the problem, and it's not right. And the poor pitchers, they're athletes that need to be treated as such, and they need to be able to develop their skill. And I feel very strongly about this because of how closely I work with them. So that's my 2 cents on that.
All right. It's a little bit more than 2 cents. And, but I have to
know.
agree with you wholeheartedly. You know, I have not been involved in pro ball, but I know that exactly what you're talking about because I see very frequently maybe a starting pitcher throws on a Friday and pitches in a game, maybe up 200 pitches. And then he may come in relief on a Sunday. And the excuse is, oh, well, he's scheduled to do his side session today anyway, so it's okay that he's being brought into the game. And I don't know where and why baseball came to the conclusion that one full day of rest was enough for a pitcher. I mean, I guess it comes from what people do when they go like weightlifting. I don't know where they came up with this, but I would challenge a professional pitcher who's involved in the minor leagues or the major leagues and has to follow this schedule. I would challenge you to ask the coach, why am I throwing a side session within 48 hours after I just threw 90 or 100 pitches when that's interfering with my recovery? Like, can you give me some reason why we're doing this? Until someone comes up with an explanation of why you're picking up a baseball, you know, within that time when you're supposed to be recovering, I don't understand why they do it. And it's not a surprise when we see pitchers wearing down as the season gets along instead of getting stronger, which you would imagine that they would get stronger. But I guess in baseball, they think that pitching arms are like appliances. It's just, they just go and go and go until they don't go anymore. Well, you know, an appliance can't heal itself, but a human being can if you give the human being time to actually recover. And as far as I know, there's only one major league pitcher that I've heard of that doesn't follow the throw 2 days after I started, and that's Bartolo Colon, who's now like 47 or 48 years old and still pitching. And pitching, I would also say, pitching with not very good mechanics that'll probably hurt him, but yet I think because he takes that full 4 days in between starts, it somehow, you know, manages to avoid the disabled list. But anyway, that's my rant on that. And again, I'm waiting for a pitching coach to give me an explanation why you need to throw 2 days after you just started. I don't understand it, and I want someone to explain it.
Well, what I'm working on is a solution for. I mean, part of it is almost it's like they're talking out of both sides of your mouth. We're really afraid the pitcher's arm can't handle it, so let's pull him at 5 innings or 75 pitches or control the pitch count. And on the other hand, wow, we're really afraid he's going to lose his skill if he doesn't grease up his arm on the bullpen. So they're looking at frequency they're looking at frequency. They're missing the boat on frequency and dealing only with volume. And anybody who works in performance, and I want people to understand that I'm coming from a performance viewpoint here, performance as in sports science, and how we as coaches who have to get, as an Olympic weightlifting coach, getting somebody ready for a competition who's got to lift the most amount of weight. There's things you have to understand about performance and pushing, et cetera. And it's never to pull back in a way like this. And it also is never to train under fatigue. And it's also never to think that you've got to do this more frequently as opposed to having quality starts that go deeper, but you have more rest. But what I'm working on and what I'm going to want to do is have a major league team follow some ideas for how a pitcher can get rest, also hone his skill, also, be ready for the next start. And the reason why I know what I do works is because my pitchers who've always been with me, when they would go away to school or whatever, they would call me for a management of, hey, this is when I started, when should I pitch again? And I have had many coaches, not in the pros, call me and say, hey, how should I manage this kid? He's special and blah, blah, blah. And I would give them ideas. And not that they would do that same thing with all their pitchers, but it's the way we got a lot of pitchers through pretty exhaustive schedules, especially when they were good enough and being invited to all kinds of tournaments. It was tricky, and the coaches didn't want the responsibility of having something happen. So it does work, but coaches do need solutions. I think the coaches kind of feel like a lot of this stuff is a little crazy, but no coach wants to lose his job because he's going against management. But I think if a solution is given to someone, and that's what I am working on, and my listeners, you'll be the first to hear my ideas when I have them set, and I'm working on it now. And yeah, because I think that there's some blind spots. Like I said, not to repeat metaphors, not seeing the forest for the trees. And then the other metaphor I want to use is the fruit of a poison tree. The solutions aren't going to work if the main issue is not being addressed. They're never going to really solve the problem. So, anyway, great topic, Joe.
Well, thank you for your commentary on that. And in all seriousness, I know it's about staying sharp in between starts, but maybe let's move that bullpen session to a little bit closer to the next start rather than so close to the previous start. And any feedback from the coaches out there, please send an email to Angel at gymscience.com with your take on that and how you are keeping your pitchers recovered. So let's move on to the teaching moment, where we are going to talk about the late arm, and you are going to talk about all of the risks and dangers of a late arm, because I think it's something that is a little bit overlooked. There's a lot of pitchers that pitch with a late arm, and maybe you can shed some light on the dangerousness of having a late arm in your pitching motion.
Yeah, it actually is. It's interesting to me how many pitchers in the major leagues, in fact, when pitchers get injured and you or a coach or someone sends me something and says, hey, could you take a look at this? Do you see anything? I can't tell you the high percentage of where the arm is late. And when pitchers come to me and they're having performance issues, again, having a late arm is one of these very, very common issues, particularly if the pitcher is a high school guy who's coming from an infield background because he doesn't know certain things about the way the pitching arm is different than an infield throwing arm, or a pitcher that has had shoulder surgery who is got the nervous system that's still protecting the movement around the shoulder, so it tends to slow down a little bit. But the late arm is not a thing that should be overlooked. And until you recognize that somebody has it, you can't really start to figure out a way to improve it. So what I wanted the show to be about is to talk about what is the ideal place for the arm to be at stride foot contact. And when we talk about a late arm, we're talking about where is the arm when the front foot lands. And this is a marker that those of us who do analysis use. You know, we have the skill of pitching broken down into phases. And the second movement where the pitcher makes the stride and his front foot makes contact with the ground, at that moment when the front foot makes contact, and guys, this could be flat-footed, it could be a heel, we don't love that, but it could be the ball of the foot, but it's when the contact is first made, not when the foot's completely down if he has a partial touchdown. When that contact is made, that is identified as the end of that stride phase, and we want the arm to be in a certain place. So as you're looking at the photo that I've provided, you're seeing, and by the way, this is Daniel Slominski. Right now, he's pitching for University of San Francisco. He has been a pitcher I've worked with since he was younger. He's got the ability to have some of the cleanest mechanics. He has, with his volition, and allowed me to use these photos of him because this is actually a drill photo. So what you're seeing here is me putting him in this position, and from this position, he was actually going to be throwing. So there is video, but these are still shots because I want to teach you some specific things. So in this picture of Daniel, where it's labeled from this SFC shoulder and hip position, this is actually, you'll notice his front foot's down because it's a drill. So of course, I'm not going to have him on his toe or whatever. So this is the end of what we call the frontal plane phase, or the phase where the pitcher's actually sideways. So when the foot makes contact with the ground, and for purposes of teaching, we've got his foot flat, notice that his entire body is sideways. Now, the arm being late refers to, of course, his pitching arm. Now, I want everyone to see the angle of that pitching arm. Now, the angles that we use as guidelines, of course, come out of the ASMI biomechanical evaluations. And what they did is they look at pitchers that do things well and they come up with these standards. Well, what was very interesting is the standards they come up with, when you take a qualitative analyst like myself, we can actually explain, well, why is this angle so good? Whenever we say an angle's good, it's because at that position, the muscles and the joints and the ligaments and things that are going to be involved in performance and efficient movement happen to be in a place where they really can do their job well. So their statistic and what we know qualitatively about actions and joints, this is where we recommend the arm be. Now, there is some wobble to everything. So if you saw the ASMI drawings, if you took that forearm, so see the angle of the forearm there? If he were up against a wall and perpendicular to that wall, and that wall had a big clock on it, and the center of the clock was right where his elbow is, that arm would be pointing to 10 o'clock. In terms of biomechanical guidelines, if he was at 9:30, he'd still be okay. If he was at 9, he would not be okay. This is a bad position to be in, and it is one that we see frequently. We actually see arms at stride foot contact that are at 8. They're actually hanging downward. But if I'm teaching a pitcher the correct angle, I'm going to put him right here because it's the exact perfect position of the arm so that he can do the next thing that he's going to do, which is externally rotate that shoulder. So notice that the forearm is at 10. If that forearm is below 9:30, his arm is considered late. And what happens then is, because the motion is like a song with a number of beats, his body is going to arrive into position and ready to start the acceleration, but the ball won't be in the correct position yet, or his shoulder won't feel like it's externally rotated enough. So in order to make up for that one beat, because the brain's going, whoa, I'm ready to throw, but the ball's not ready yet, he will usually put the elbow forward, or he will lift the arm up, or he'll do something that creates an extra moment so he can feel that the ball's in position to accelerate, but the thing he's doing causes a problem for the acceleration. So the reason why we love this angle here, and I've written right on this first picture, is the shoulder rotates externally as his right hip. So if he had jeans on, you would look at the pocket of his right hip. When that hip starts to turn forward, because now he's starting the rotation phase, that shoulder simultaneously will start to move backward. So we've got the shoulder going in one direction, the hip moving in the other direction. And if you look at the second picture, this is the goal of this phase right here. The goal of this phase is to get to the second picture, which is what we call max external rotation position. This is where the pitcher has squared up, and now the acceleration of the ball will begin. The ball is not accelerating until this point where he now is going to use his shoulder accelerators to throw the ball. Now, if you go back to the right, the other picture, when that arm is rotating backwards, what's really happening is the accelerators are stretching. So when you see this second picture, you can see his arm is behind his chest. He's actually got a good stretch in his shoulders. If that arm is late, when he arrives here into the max external rotation position, his elbow will need to come forward because his hand will not have gotten the ball into the correct position. And by the way, just for the point of being thorough, because I am a thorough teacher, and what I do all day is look at video, and I have my pitcher standing there. In the picture of Daniel with the max external rotation position, ideally I would have wanted to see that forearm a little more, the elbow a little more open at a pure 90-degree angle, which would tell me that he had appropriate elbow velocity. So that if you look at that picture, you see how the forearm is angling a little bit towards the field as opposed to being a straight line parallel to your screen. But what you have to know when you're a troubleshooter is he's doing a drill. He was throwing from the first position. And so he's not going to have all the acceleration, and he never has an arm that is not in the correct position. This isn't actually considered incorrect, but when I work with correct shoulder mechanics, I do want to see that arm a little bit more open there. So just for the sake of thoroughness, but it's not incorrect. He still looks great. And what I love is you're still seeing the stretch around the shoulder. He would not have that. So when your arm is late, you are not going to get the pre-stretch around the shoulder accelerators because you didn't have time. Now picture the 10 o'clock position. He's at 10. And by the time he rotated and changed his body position, he's way back at what? 3? Okay. If you start, let's say you start your arms hanging down and you're at like 8, you're lucky if you're up at 11 or 12 by the time you rotate. So that's what we call being late. So then he would arrive square like this, but his arm's like, well, where's the ball? That's what his brain's saying, because his brain can feel that something's off. So he makes up another movement. So when you don't have the correct position at stride foot contact, the rotation will be off, because the rotation is the next thing that happens. And the rotation of the upper trunk is what will be off. The arm can't come through at the right time. So then you've got a direct effect on the velocity, because the way that a pitcher gets from photo 1 to photo 2 is in a sequence of 3 pieces of rotation. And if the arm is late, the last sequencing, the last segment will not be timed correctly. So now you've got a loss of velocity from rotation problems. You've got a loss of a pre-stretch that couldn't occur because your arm wasn't in the right place when you started to rotate. And then you've got the pitcher making up another beat, and he's going to put his elbow forward or he's going to lift his arm up. He's going to do anything he can to feel that he is getting that last piece of external rotation. However, he's not getting it at the right time. So now what you have is the acceleration path will be altered. Now, in addition to those things, so the late arm has a direct effect on velocity for a number of reasons that relate to how well the accelerators are stretched and also arrival time. But the other thing that happens is both of those things that the pitcher will do, and those are just 2 of probably, those are the 2 most common that I see, but you never know what a pitcher's arm's going to do. When the pitcher does those 2 things, he actually brings the arm forward in an unusual way. And when you bring the elbow forward from the elbow, it's actually a shoulder movement, but it brings the elbow forward. You get weird rotation on the forearm. And from all of you, we know this is forearm month. When your forearm rotates when you don't want it to, remember the forearm's rotating the ball. You get the pitcher's fingers in weird places on the ball. And he's not going to have the same kind of ability to create the spin he wants sometimes. Sometimes the type of pitch will be affected. He's not behind the ball in the same way, and it's because his arm didn't come through the acceleration path correctly. Now, all of this that I just said is because in photo 1, instead of being at 10 o'clock, a pitcher was at 9, 8:30, 8 o'clock. I've seen a forearm recently where it was completely, the shoulder to the elbow was in the position Daniels is in, but the forearm was completely vertical to the ground. That's how late the arm was. And that is a lack of ability of the pitcher to rotate a shoulder, because what the forearm angle denotes is the amount of shoulder rotation that a pitcher has. The forearm changes angle with the shoulder. So when I see major league pitchers, and there's one, I don't want to mention names because these guys are, they're human beings too, but he's a great pitcher, has problems here and there. And every time I look, his arm's so late. And I'm like, why hasn't anybody told him? And this isn't a big deal to an elite pitcher. He can figure it out. And plus, guess what? When you say your arm's late, he's going to go, yeah, it does feel like it's lagging. And when you have them throw just one time from the correct position, they love it. So Daniel's in this position because when I said throw, and he comes through from this, and his shoulders, you see, they know what the shoulder's supposed to do. They just didn't start in the right position. So if you don't start right, you're not going to end up right. But they know what to do in the middle. So when you start a pitcher from this position here and you say throw from here, all of a sudden they'll look and the first thing they'll say is, the ball came out of my hand sooner in the motion that I'm used to. He'll be all excited. You'll see a smile. You'll see the eyes light up. And it's because his arm went from here to external, and then he accelerated instead of from too low, doing all he can to get external, then having to juxtaposition his elbow or his shoulder again. And then you end up with a ball that comes out of the hand and it feels like he had it in his hand for a while. By the way, when you see a pitcher, when you coaches, I know, see this, you might not be looking at the mechanics, but you'll notice he looks like he's pushing the ball. Usually pushing the ball comes from coming through the acceleration path in a weird way. And that usually only happens because the arm didn't start at the right place. It started too low. It was not in what we want for the stride foot contact position. So that's my little thing on the late arm. This is a widely misunderstood flaw, and it's ignored. And coaches, please, especially when you have a pitcher who's having trouble, or a pitcher who he looks good, or he's hitting his spots, but his velocity doesn't go up, look to see, because they can learn how to pitch with the late arm. Always remember, when you're listening to me talk about mechanics, I'm not a pitcher. I'm not a pitching coach. My job is to teach correct textbook mechanics. You guys put the bells and whistles on it. So when you are seeing pitchers and they have these flaws, don't say, oh, well, what she's saying is crazy. No, they've done a great job of practicing something and they become good at it. And so that is to take nothing away from them. But when we, people like myself, want to teach, we have to teach. I have to teach what is actually just normal movement. So when you see a pitcher and you've got, why isn't he increasing his velocity? But he seems to perform well, but something's not right. Look to see if that arm's in the right place. Also, even if he's pushing the ball, leading with the elbow or doing something, he can also be an effective pitcher. It's not to say he's doing it right, but when you're trying to figure out what is wrong here, I do want to improve this guy. What am I missing? Go back and check out to see where is his arm when he reaches stride foot contact.
All right. And again, go to Angel's new YouTube channel to see the images, and we'll also have links in the show notes so that you can follow along. You can rewind and follow along. This is pretty amazing new twist on what we're doing here with the podcast. I'm so engrossed here on looking at the at the photos and listening to your description and everything. What I want to reiterate for you, which you've already said, just to drive the point home a little harder, there are many pitchers, and there are many major league pitchers who are still able to throw 95, 97, maybe even 100 miles an hour with a late arm. And to Angel's point, that doesn't mean you shouldn't fix it. I mean, it should be fixed because, like Angel said, they've figured out a way to reach those velocities and that kind of performance in spite of the late arm. And when you're using a late arm like this, Angel, you're putting tremendous stress on the joints, I would imagine, especially the elbow. Isn't that true?
Actually, I'm so glad you just said that because I just realized I forgot to say something important. And I love that you said the elbow because it's not the elbow. I know leading with the elbow is one of the results of a late arm. It's not the only thing that can cause leading with the elbow, but if your arm is late, you're going to probably lead with the elbow. But the word elbow can be misleading because you think leading with the elbow means the elbow is under strain. It's actually a shoulder mechanics issue that is incorrect that causes the elbow to come through. So but what I want to say is, so when you've got a pitcher who has had a labrum tear, when you lead with the elbow and when your arm is late, you're putting a lot of stress on the shoulder joint. And other things are usually accompanying it, like too much flexion at max external rotation, different things. So just remember this, coaches. If you've got a guy who had a labral tear and he's come back, if you watch him, you're probably going to see a late arm at stride foot contact. It's probably how he got the problem. And it also can be a result of the surgery and him not wanting to rotate his shoulder. It's an indirect nervous system response as a protective mechanism. It's kind of like it protects the areas that are sensitive. But just a tip, labrum and shoulder issues, look at the arm to see where it's at. When you put a pitcher in this position and he throws from this position Daniel's in the first photo, they love it. And you will see probably different mechanics. And if you don't have film and it's hard for you to look, just have someone who looks kind of funky throw from this position here, and you might see night and day. And I know you coaches have your own ways of doing things you have genius, and I want you to use your genius. And my job is to give you a few more tools to work with because this late arm issue is so prominent. I cannot tell you. And especially in high school, and especially when you've got pitchers who are catchers, shortstops, and third basemen, and they don't know anything about rotating the shoulder. So their arm is late at stride foot contact. They look like a shortstop getting ready to, rope the ball. And it's so common, I cannot tell you, but it doesn't work for pitching. Pitching, you have to get that shoulder into this nice neutral place at foot contact. Then as the body turns, that arm goes. The forearm moves into a perpendicular position. Then it moves way back, just like you'll see on Daniel's second photo. And when you have that beautiful rotation around the shoulder, that converts into this beautiful acceleration. You interfere with that, you're not going to get the acceleration, but you get stress. You get stress around the shoulder. It can affect the elbow, Joe, when there's things that they do in addition to that. But the late arm is usually going to affect the shoulder. And one of my favorite pitchers who retired after many surgeries, Santana.
Yeah, Johan.
His arm was so late.
Yep.
And he kept having the labrum problems. And trust me, my heart was breaking because I could see it and it was obvious. And it's heartbreaking when you know what's going on. And the pitcher's having those kinds of pains and problems. And they match up. But my job is to connect those dots because I do this all day long. So I've seen everything a million times. But great point. And thank you for bringing that up, Joe, because if the kid's already got labrum problems or pain, coaches, please look at this because you could save him from surgery by identifying this early.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Johan Santana because you and I discussed him at length, and he actually pitched a no-hitter, the only no-hitter in New York Mets history, while pitching with that late arm, and everybody talked about, it was that game that ended his career. You saw his career ending a year or 2 years before that because of what he was doing with his late arm. So and that had nothing to do with the pitch counts that we've been talking about earlier in this episode. It was about the flaw in his motion, and other things.
Yeah. And well, you know what? These guys are gamers. they're gamers. They're going to be in the game for as long as they can. That's why a lot of them don't talk about their
Right.
pain. I mean, when people say, oh, no one had pain before, no, they didn't talk about it because there weren't solutions for it, especially way back when you would say, my shoulder's sore, and they just put ice on it. Nobody knew how to really look at things. But these guys are gamers. They're going to pitch like that and pitch, and they're going to learn how to do it well. That's why I have so much respect for them. And why, when I see something like this and I know, oh, wow, this is awesome. When pitchers come to me and I go, I see why you're having the problem. And they get this look on their face like they're almost scared. And I go, dude, you should be happy right now. I found out what's going on. And then they smile. They go, oh, yeah. I said, don't worry. Most pitchers are thinking, they don't want to know what they're doing wrong because then they're just going to have to try to figure it out themselves, or they don't even want to know. No, that's not the day we have anymore. We have people who know how to connect dots. So it's exciting to identify a problem for a pitcher because guess what? They're going to pitch through it just like Santana did. But that's the kind of guys they are. So, and it's their job.
Right.
No one wants to give up their job.
Right. They're warriors.
So awesome.
So there we go.
I love this photos. To the audience, I hope you love having these photos. I feel like somebody took handcuffs off of my wrists. I'm not kidding. It was so hard to teach about things and know that I really taught it well, that everyone heard the same thing. Accuracy and clarity is so important to a teacher. So I'm so excited, and I hope you are too.
Yeah. And for those of you who are lifting weights right now or driving in the car or whatever, when you get done doing what you're doing, consider checking out the images that Angel is referring to and listening to that whole thing again, because I think you'll find it very educating. So I'm going to take the ball away from the closer from the starter or the opener or whatever we're calling the pitcher today. And I'm calling in from the bullpen, Angel Borrelli, to take us through the 9th inning. What's your surprise for us today, Angel?
Well, I don't have a surprise because actually I was forced to throw the first inning in a game last night. So I'm really tired today.
Maybe we'll give you a day off then.
I couldn't resist. Anyway, I read an article in a training magazine, and this is for high school coaches, but this is also something that is bothering me. And again, it's one of these, come on, guys, we're not seeing the forest for the trees. So as everyone knows, especially high school coaches, the NFHS came out with rules last year about pitch count controls, that you can only pitch so many pitches. And they also came along with some rest and recovery, which look like probably the new USA baseball recovery guidelines. They're similar. And they're actually on point, where when you have a certain number of pitches that you throw, you have to have so many days off. But they have the pitch count control as well. So a pitcher can be in the middle of the game or the 5th inning or 6th inning. He's got to be pulled. And so now you've got to find someone else to go in. So the article was about the complaints of the coaches. And the coaches were saying, number one, that this pitch count control, and I think they were mentioning 75 here, was really causing problems for them. That number two, they were thinking that it's too much rest that they're getting, that there's no way that you should be able to pitch 2 days later after 75 pitches, which is incorrect. 75 pitches is actually a 3-day recovery. 79, 80 and over is 4 days. But and these are USA baseball recovery guidelines that I started following in 95. They've altered them a little more on the less conservative side, but not that big of a deal. And they work, guys. They work. And they're based on the way arms heal. So we've got high school coaches complaining about the pitch count and also the recovery days. And what the message that I want to send home to everyone, especially the high school coaches, is, and I know this is awful because it's a rule you've got to follow. But if anybody, decides they all want to get together and they want to go talk to these people who come out with these rules, I'm going to say this again. and this is especially true for high school. It is not the number of pitches that a pitcher throws. It's the amount of recovery he gets for whatever he throws. Now, I'm going to say this with making some assumptions. I'm going to assume that, one, when a pitcher is in and he's pitching, that the coach is aware that he is still effective and he's not showing any signs of fatigue. For example, when my pitchers are in a bullpen, and let's say we're going deep, which this last few weeks, getting guys ready for college, they were all leaving. We were going inning by inning. They would do 25 pitches and we'd throw 15, and they would want to go X number of innings. I go over to my catcher and I say, how's his velocity? And he says, it started dropping about 6 pitches ago. How's his location? He's starting to miss, even on his best pitch. I look at the mound and I go, okay, we're done. Now, does he think he's done? No. But I already knew, because I could tell my ear wasn't hearing the same thing. I already also knew that I could see the catcher having to reach way out to catch balls that he wasn't catching before. And so me, with my neophyte knowledge about those sorts of things, because that's really not my forte, but performance is my forte, I knew that he was done. Now, and you usually know within 5, it takes maybe 5 or 6 pitches, you go, okay, something's going on here. And if you check with the catcher, you check with the pitcher may not tell you, but trust your instincts. Assuming that the coach is on top of all those things, if a pitcher is going to become good at what he does and learn how to battle and learn and understand his pitches and learn strategy, he's got to be left to do his max. And when his max is over, if you stop him when it's over, and then you give him the recovery, when he comes back, his max will be more than what it was. This is sport science training theory. If somebody bench presses 225 and that they can do that for 4 reps, and if you give them the adequate rest, whether we're talking between sets or between workouts or whatever, and you know how to increase that volume, he will be doing 225 for 5 reps. And then the next thing, he's at 315, and he's he's increasing his capabilities. To take an athlete and want him to improve, you take him to his limit. You let him recover from the limit, which is when he improves physiologically. And then when he comes back, he is improved at whatever it was he was doing and resting from. This cannot be ignored with our pitchers. So the high school thing is a little strange, but this coach whose solution was, well, I want to see if they'll consider us not giving them so much rest, then we could handle this 75 pitch count limit. And I'm shaking my head going, once again, missing the forest for the trees. So coaches, please know that taking an athlete to his max is a good thing, as long as it's to his max and not where you are just leaving him in. So assuming you're doing your job, let him do his job. And I'm talking about those schools that don't have these kinds of regulations. Don't be afraid to allow your pitchers to develop. And this, by the way, is what's wrong with all those things we mentioned with the major league pitchers. The 5 innings, the not seeing the twice through the lineup because statistics say they don't do as well. Leave them in and make them learn how to do well if they're your starter. If that's what your complaint is. Oh, and by the way, if you're having to mess with roster rules, then that tells you something's wrong with the philosophy. If you're trying to mess around with DLs and this and that just because you need pitchers to have rest. So for all the coaches out there and the youth coaches, let your pitchers develop. Don't let him pitch sloppy. Don't let him pitch fatigued. Give him the rest he needs. And if you do that one thing, it will give you amazing results. And amazing results is what we're looking for.
Well, there you go. I'm thinking about a couple of different things right now, and one of them I mentioned before. I said, major league pitchers generally do not get stronger throughout the season. They tend to get tired and worn out, and it's again, it goes back to the recovery. If they would get their proper recovery, there's a good chance they would not only keep their strength but probably be stronger. I would think if they were getting their proper recovery instead of being maxed out at 100 pitches, they'd get up to 110. And then when they got to the postseason,
absolutely,
it wouldn't be a big deal for them to go, into the 8th or 9th inning at 130, 135 pitches because they've been building that up.
The first clue that something is wrong is when you see great performers not improving at their job. Who does that? In life, who does that? But if you're operating, everyone out there knows if you've ever missed sleep, and if you've missed it more than one night, or let's say 2 nights, everyone out there knows how you get. And then when you get caught up on it, you're like, whoa. And then you realize how bad you were. That's because when we are not recovered, it's not just your personality that's tired. There's changes in your blood. There's changes in enzymes. There's changes in all kinds of things. Tissue, this, that, the other. It's a systemic issue. And when you don't honor that, and you don't honor it for X number of weeks per year, and you're performing, you're going to get degradation. You're going to get lack of performance. You're going to get everybody running around trying to come up with ideas and ways to offset it instead of just saying, give them some rest. So I want this. I'm on a mission right now. This is my most recent mission, which is to start to come up with ideas. Actually, I don't have to come up with them. They're what I've used with my guys the whole time. Solutions for how they work it to where if they take their days off, they've got to start the next day. How do they handle that? Ways to practice your pitching without actually pitching, things like that. And the thing is, I think that there needs to be more innovation around that. Less statistics, more innovation. Let's use the statistics to know that we have a problem. Let's not use it to start over trying to redo the game of baseball to where now we don't want a poor pitcher to have to face a hitter a third time because the poor pitcher might get hit. No, I think that it doesn't, for me, as somebody who works with pitchers, my pitchers would hate that as a philosophy. They would be saying, bring it on. So I am, coming from a performance and an aggressive strength coach and performance coach sort of perspective, but also too, if you're doing what's right, you're going to get better results.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway,
yeah.
Great show, Joe.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to your point, limiting who you're facing and how many times you're facing, that goes against everything that a competitive athlete wants to do. And
right.
And from the perspective of a hitter, I can tell you that when there was a pitcher who was going well on the mound, and we couldn't get a hit off of him the first time around or the second time around, if it turned out that he was being taken out by the time we got around to hit against him the third time, we were relieved and excited and ready to jump off the dugout bench because it was like, oh, thank God they're finally taking this guy out so we can get a chance to hit somebody else. So
interesting.
I guess there's two sides
to
it.
Yeah. Like let's say this is a great way to use statistics. Hey, so-and-so, we just saw the statistics, and this team here, every time on your the hitter seeing you the third time, he got a hit off you. What do you think about that? Let the pitcher know what his predicament is and go, oh, and then things start to change. That's the way you use statistics. Not, oh, so let's not let you be in there.
Right.
Because, do you know what I'm saying? This is a guy who's supposed to be controlling the game, and now you're all of a sudden going to tie his hands. So as a performance coach, it's not in line with what we're trying to do, which make these guys be the best and bring the best. You can't ask a guy to bring his best when you're not dealing with him like he is the best. And that's the thing that is conflicting to me about some of these rules. So anyway, thank you so much for today, Joe.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, listener, for listening to this episode of Baseball Pitching the Fix. For more about Angel, go to her website, gymscience.com. You can email your questions and comments to angel@gymscience.com. And as mentioned earlier, please be sure to check out Angel Borrelli Pitching on YouTube. You definitely want to go there and check out the visuals that we discussed today. If you liked what you heard, please tell a friend, a pitcher, a parent, coach. Let them know about this podcast and tell them to subscribe so they can get all the knowledge that you're getting right now. And we'll be back in about 2 weeks. And in the meantime, we wish you safe and effective performance on the pitching mound.